a minute past, so I think we could go.
Okay, professionals, we are. Let's get going. Thank you. Thank you for joining. Oh my God, this is a very high lectern, or I'm very small. But anyway, I'm very pleased to meet you all and to have you all here. My name's Chiara O'Reilly, and before we get started, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which we meet, which is the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Thanks to my bottle. Excellent. I think it's really important to think about this acknowledgement to country and place today as we meet. I was wandering through campus with Marina and Chloe earlier, and we were admiring all the beautiful trees and plants on our campus and thinking about the generations of community and elders past and present who cared for place and country, and the way that this is really essential to our campus and our experience, passing on knowledge and culture. And of course, this was land that was never ceded. So it's always important to think about that. So thank you for coming tonight, for joining us in person to those in the room, and for joining us online for those on Zoom. I am really delighted to be here. My name's Chiara. I'm the Director of the Museum and Heritage Studies program at the university. And I am delighted to be here sharing the room with these wonderful people on stage for our discussion about museums as sites of education and innovation. So I'll firstly introduce our speakers, and then we've got time for a bit of a discussion about some key themes that we think are really important to think about, thinking about the role of education within cultural institutions, within also formal education spaces. We've got people with great experience in that, thinking about the role of education more broadly in terms of professional development for people working in the sector, and then thinking about the kind of future and the challenges, because our speakers have a lot of experience in this space. So I'm going alphabetically, people, okay? So Chloe Appleby, who's on the far side from me, is an assistant curator at the Powerhouse Museum, and she's a graduate of the Museum and Heritage Studies program. And she has done some wonderful work, particularly recently around gaming culture and gaming at Powerhouse Museum. So very interested in technology and those sorts of aspects. Alphabetically, I'm also going to introduce my colleague, who's a lecturer and also curator, Marina Grasso, who's someone I taught in a number of subjects. I taught Chloe as well when she was a postgraduate student and doing her studies here at the university. And I now have the delight of working with her, where she's part of the team teaching into our program this year. And then, of course, framed in the middle is Eddie Wu, who needs no introduction, I suspect, to many of us who've watched TV, who've struggled with maths problems with children, who've done all these things. But it's great to have Eddie here, because not only is he an educational ambassador for arts and social sciences at the University of Sydney, he's a powerful advocate for education generally, and also served for a term as a member of the Board of Trustees of the Powerhouse Museum. So I think there's a really exciting opportunity tonight to focus on cultural institutions, which are the broadest reach of museums and heritage, is how I think about them. And I really want to stress from the beginning this key role that they have as holders of cultural memory, and spaces that serve to expand and inspire learning, not just in formal ways, but just in those conversations. So I'm going to chair the panel as best I can, but they're quite rowdy.
You weren't supposed to warn them about that, Chiara.
Ideas, which I'm really excited about. So I really want to start off with a really easy question maybe, but one that I've been thinking about a lot, which is about what was the aspect that inspired you, particularly to Chloe and Marina, but also Eddie, to think about museums. What are the things that you really value in museums? So who would like to start first? Go.
You structured an orderly of you. I thought it's a mathematician on the panel. I would be the one to be leaning in that direction, but I'm okay with anyone.
So what I was going to say to sort of respond to that is that it was the ability to access that wonder that you experience as a child every time you go into a new space, into a new room, see a new object. There was that, oh my God, like, I think we've only ever kind of experienced that in the sort of, you know, popular culture sort of realm when we saw a Jurassic Park for the first time at the theatre. But to, like, even coming in today with my dad, I said, you know, my first memory of a museum is on his shoulders, looking up inside the kind of belly of that great whale at the Australian Museum. And I'm 40 and I still remember that. So I think that that tapping in almost to that childhood wonder.
No, I think that's a beautiful way to start us off, because it is their memories of really long term for the institution, but also for the community generally. So who wants to go next?
Yeah, I'm happy to. For me, drawing that childhood wonder, I vividly remember, so I've come out from West, I'm from Fairfield, and we went to Fairfield City Museum with my nonna, and it was me and my brother. We made these fantastic clothes peg dolls, and just that wow factor for me, it didn't come from this large scale institution. It came from the core memories that I have with my family. And from there, I guess it's just been ingrained where I was just like, wow, museums are just wonderful. And it was in my undergrad, I have undergrad in ancient history, and I had the opportunity to intern with Dr. Paul Donnelly. He's the assistant director of Chavchak Wing Museum now. And it just really inspired me to see stories in different aspects through objects and meanings that they can hold for many people. So yeah, that's kind of my little with museums and heritage. I did have a fun little heritage point where I actually remember playing Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, and is that the one in Venice? It is in Italy. And there's a Castel di Saint Angelo. Yeah. So I got lost in it when I was in Europe. And I looked around, I'm like, I'm really confused. And it just dawned on me, I'm like, oh wow, I can actually navigate because of this game. And it's just fascinating to me how the capabilities of like merging digital and heritage into one, and like that lasting effect it can have on you. So I'll stop gasbagging.
Nice.
Not at all. I was having quite a good time. I almost forgot here I was on the panel. I was just thinking, I guess it's such a, like you said, a broad question, and there's so many different hats that I could wear in terms of my experience, and I guess maybe that speaks to all of us. Museums occupy and heritage occupy such a holistic place in society that we meet it at so many different touch points. And so I think about, you know, as you've both shared, you know, as a child, you know, being young and sort of experiencing this is a first place where we have this embodied experience of learning something so almost by definition alien and foreign to our experience. Then, you know, as a parent of 3 children, 1 in high school, 2 in primary school, this being such a wonderful experience to share collectively with others, and to then there's nothing quite like standing in front of an artwork or an exhibition and you know, just taking it in and saying, what do you notice? Which is invariably different to what someone else will notice. And then that shared collective experience is much richer than if I just stood there alone. And then in some ways, the most obvious place for me to go is that as an educator, I'm all about learning. And it's actually very interesting. You know, you were talking before we got into this room, actually, about, you know, being a curator, does that have a sort of educational sort of aspect to it? And to me, I think as an educator, a large part of what I do is actually curation. I think about trying to craft an experience that will help my students to learn something. And so often, I kind of, actually a lot of, we'll probably get on this later on, but a lot of what I try and do is help my students experience something outside the confines of the walls of my classroom. That was very dramatic. So I think museums and heritage are the perfect sort of experiences or places or environments to help that happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think the theme that's come across from all of you is that bodily experience and the fact that it's experiential. So that there are that social communication in those spaces, and there's a collaborative space for that learning. And I think that's where museums are so interesting, or heritage sites, because they are places that are valued by our community, aren't they? And that our community appreciates the work they do and recommends that you go and visit the museum. That's something that we like to do. So yeah, no, I think that's a fabulous start off for our sort of discussion and thinking about things. So I suppose for cultural institutions, what they're always trying to do is they're trying to expand their audience. They're trying to reach new ideas, new communities, and that's something that educators are very skilled at doing. I would really like to hear from Eddie, to start with. You've expanded the field of education, maybe would be the way we'd term it. You've got a YouTube channel, you've written multiple books now. It's getting quite the space on the shelf there. And you've hosted TV programs as well. Can you give us a sense of why you wanted to expand your teaching reach? Because obviously it's a big call.
Yeah, I should point out, I would love to take credit and say, well, I had a 10-year strategic plan. And this is just the next set of milestones that I was heading towards. Actually, 10 years is not a coincidental point of time. It was 10 years ago this month that I put up my first video online. There was no grand, thank you. I think my YouTube channel is a small child running around causing havoc. I didn't have initially a grand plan. It was, I won't rehearse the whole story, but it was just about helping a particular student who couldn't access school. But then I sort of stepped into this world. Actually, it's a little bit like your experience, Chloe, I'm sure we'll get to shortly, but it's kind of like, oh, there's a whole universe here that I was not aware of, and kind of here I am, and wow, what opportunities there are. And so I think that was my first taste of the fact that, I mean, I love teaching in a classroom. It's why actually, much to the frustration of a lot of other people that I work with who would love me to stop teaching because that would give me more time to do all of the other things. That's the core part. Every other aspect that you mentioned flows out of me being a teacher. So I still love being in that classroom, but it's so obvious. I think we all probably have had an experience of the classroom is almost by definition a very limited experience. I haven't even, just talking, even if you have a great experience of school, it is within this site, it's a bit of a bubble, and we come out of school and we come like, whoa, this big university. And I haven't even got started about not everyone is well suited to this school environment and the whole process and structure of it. So I think my desire to kind of branch out is really about providing diverse learning experiences and an access that's broad and equitable and, different places to get into the journey of learning, rather than, as so often happens, particularly in the discipline of maths, people fall off at one point and they never, ever get back on. So it's a common experience.
I mean, that's some fabulous parallels between that and what museums do. And that kind of opening up of access. And Chloe, I see you itching to get in.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's like following what you were saying, like it's definitely something that museums need to do and have this broader access. I mean, as cultural institutions, we need to keep up to date, in particular, like with learning, but also with how the community is interacting. So you being on, having a YouTube channel, having a digital presence, is just, the outreach is just incredible. And I feel like the museum should be something we need to do that more. I'm going to be honest. And the COVID pandemic generated a lot of that change in a big, profound way, both for formal education, but also for museums. So maybe Marina, you could speak to some of the examples you can think of in that space that you thought were successful, because we're 3 years in.
I think institutions that we had previously thought of as being, very much the establishment, who then re-evaluated their persona in the public eye, actually brought huge audiences to them that they never would have. So I'm thinking of what Holly did at the Art Gallery in New South Wales, where she kind of took these kind of like, there was a picture of, I think it was like Judith beheading Horfenez, and she's like, oh, Mondays again. Like, and that was the kind of like these kind of funny art history kind of nerdy things, but, or like there was a picture of one of the Medicis, and he's kind of like his beautiful suit of armor that he's never going to use in actual battle. And then that's like, cruising for my next Tinder pic. And it was like, yes, like you nailed it. And So there were so many people who then decided to join the young art gallery society rather than, so they're under 30, so I'm not allowed in. But what it meant was that they were allowed to kind of think about that space as being their space, even when they couldn't necessarily physically access it. And I think that's really important. Saying, hey, we're open for business is not enough. You actually have to say, hey, you're our person. We need you to come and check this one special thing out. And when you target every single person that way, I think that's what's so significant.
I mean, for me, that campaign was incredibly successful because it really changed the way the art gallery was thought of by people. It gave the art gallery a different voice.
They got in the paper because they were so good
with their things. So I think there is some great sort of spaces where there is this reinvention of the very formal staid voice of education and the education focus of museums, where we celebrate the leisure activity and we celebrate those other spaces. Did you want to bring in some of your experience at the Powerhouse? Because you've done some fabulous work.
Thank you. I did also want to, when you talk about the young and people in the art community, currently I'm on TikTok. And there's a trend going on at the moment where it's the Sniff song, please let me get what I want. And it's this, young people going to the art museums and staring at photos, and what it is, it cuts back to their face and back to the artwork and back to their face. And I think watching it, like as a user, I was quite impacted by it. I'm like, oh wow, people, and it's becoming a trend. So people are going into art galleries and looking at artworks that they are impacted by, and then it spreads. It's beautiful viral trend, so it's bringing more people in. So when you said young and 30, I was like, oh yeah, it's great. Like it's another way of outreaching, but it's being done by the community rather than the gallery. So I thought that was just incredible. I had to. I was
using the Smiths, like
using the Smiths,
of all choices.
Oh, and it's like it's
fire.
and with the Smiths too, just like wow, I'm feeling something watching it. Like there's a few, like I've seen one with the art gallery in New South Wales with the lamb, and it's like and that one's come on. My oh no, that makes me that painting. But yeah, now I'll talk about the other stuff.
You had a question that was meant to
I had
lead
a
into
question
something
that was-
substantial. Yeah, well,
so I've I'm, as you know, into digital cultures from what just been talking about, and I'm very into gaming culture and trying to showcase that it's not just something for kids. It is playable. It is. You can interact with it, but the story, particularly what the Australian gaming community is doing, is just insane. There's a game called Wayward Strands where all hand animated, and it's a story about you're in the 1970s, and it's a flying airship that's been transformed into a hospital, and it's teaching everyone about empathy. And you're following these stories of particularly people like the really older generation, and you don't see those people in games. So it's just wonderful with what the Australian indie scene's doing. And with what I've been doing at the museum is, so we've had these things called Powerhouse Slates, done every Thursday. It's not a plug for you to come along, but it's actually on tomorrow. We've done 2 this year about gaming, and the theme was to celebrate the community, to showcase culture and art forms, and really trying to lift the veil on how games are made and how you can get into the industry. So we had games showcase, which includes video games, but also board games. We had profound speakers come in and talk about how they got into the industry, similar to what we're doing now. And it was just the people coming in and the emails I received later. This is also not for me to be boastful in any capacity, but it was just like, thank you for doing this in Sydney, where it's quite lacking. Melbourne is actually the capital for games in Australia, and nothing has happened, particularly since COVID. So for people to come together and network and to learn and to feel hopeful, and that's actually got an email from one of the developers, like, I got all this fantastic feedback because of this night from people playing it, and now I'm feeling confident to release my game. Or they went to a different expo, like they had no comments because it was fine from what we got with that experience. So it is just lovely seeing how one small idea has brought a community together, and it's through museums and it's through this is more like an informal learning space, which I'm hoping will transform into a formal learning space for them, but potentially emerging developers and game makers going to these formal schools. So yeah, I'm sorry, now I rambled.
Can I jump in on that, actually, just
Yeah.
respond? Because I just think, sorry, this is I'll take a moment to like get to this point that I'm going to make, but they say poets are people who call the same thing by many different names, and mathematicians are people who call many different things by the same name. There's like a thread that goes through, it's like, these are all the same equation. But what I love is that, your discussion of how you are using that as an opportunity to, reach out to the gaming community, give them an experience. For me, the way that you described, what's the name of the game with the Esh again? Wayward
Strand.
Wayward Strand.
Recommend playing. Steam.
Sounds like it. I'm gonna have to add to my list.
Yeah.
But
It's on Steam, you can get on Switch, you can get on PlayStation. Xbox.
you are doing a terrible job of not plugging like personal things. But anyway, just the way you described that game, and even when you were thinking and just talking about Assassin's Creed before, I just think it's so profound that even though we might think of museums and heritage and then gaming as so superficially different because the format or the medium, right? But actually, if museums and heritage are really about inviting a community into experiencing another perspective on the world through an object, through a space, is that not by definition what a game is? Just is a rose by any other name, right? So yeah, it's really,
I think this is a really interesting concept, the idea of the community, which is one that we perhaps don't think about enough often, because there's no one community.
No, exactly.
And that Marina, the example you gave of speaking to the under 30s, they're a group that is notoriously not participating in museums.
Definitely not using their cash.
No. But obviously both of these events are really targeted at diversifying the community and approaching those groups.
Yeah, and it was just incredible seeing the amount of people that were in there that were male, female. Like we saw people who were like grandparents and like celebrating games in there too, like small children. Like we had such a diverse range of people. We tried to cater for as many as possible. We even had quiet spaces for people with sensory overload issues. We had Auslan interpreters. So we really tried to make it as accessible for every aspect of one community to come in and be involved. So it's something really important to think about for museums and heritage.
And I think that this is a challenge, isn't it, across the heritage space and across, it feeds into education and how we want to broaden access and broaden opportunity for everyone. But the museums and heritage sites have a really cool role to play. I was wondering if you could speak to that and the sort of your experience of expanding the community, or your experience of, do maths teachers take students to heritage sites? I don't know.
Well, here's the thing. Some people say like, oh, you ruin everything. Mathematics is you would not believe how embarrassingly long it took me to craft this very short phrase, but sort of the conviction I've come over 15 years of being a teacher of mathematics is that mathematics is found everywhere, and it's for everyone, which is not what most people, they would say, there's these people who are very into number crunching and equations and all that kind of thing. And then there is the rest of us mere mortals who just sort of get by as best we can. But the thing is that, in telling the stories or understanding the history of our world, history was actually the subject that I was, quote unquote, if you just look at HSE marks, it was the subject I was best at school. So I took modern history and history extension, deeply enjoyed them, and almost became a history teacher. Actually, the HSI head teacher at my school, one of the highest compliments he gave me is like, hey, you kind of teach maths a bit like a history teacher. I think that was his way of giving me his like stamp of approval. I'm like, thanks, Nick, I think. Anyway, when for example, and this is a bit of a weird way to take it, but I remember when I was first, I got interested in following US politics in, I know this is going to be wildly surprising to people, but 2016. I kind of I kept up with US politics to make myself feel a little bit better about Australian politics, and it was very effective at doing that. But I started to learn about the US Constitution and the great mess of a history that the United States has. And that was when I stumbled onto the 3/5 section of the US Constitution. Now, just if anyone's not familiar, this is about how it was calculated how many seats there should be for every state within US Parliament. And it was done on the basis of population, unless you were a slave, in which case you counted for 3/5 of a person. And that was how the calculation was done. Now that's horrifying.
Yeah.
But what that speaks to is the fact that mathematics, like nuclear energy, is a power. You can light a city or you can destroy a city using it. Mathematics is the same power as amoral.
Yeah.
And so every story we can tell within, human experience or in heritage, mathematics is there for good and for ill. So that's probably more of an answer than you're expecting, but yes.
I suppose my special power would be to counter that and say museums and heritage do that too. And so there's a great potential, isn't there, to use them as spaces for everything, so that there's formidable displays about slavery in the US and in plantation museums that are deeply moving and incredibly powerful. And there's a real challenge to try and get our history in that complex picture going forward. So by bringing in gaming history, you're doing that at the Powerhouse. And you've just worked on a fabulous project in the Hawkesbury that's doing sort of part of this conversation, Marina. I wonder if you could talk about your curatorial role there.
So I was working on the Durubban exhibition out at Hawkesbury Regional Gallery. I absolutely recommend you go out and check it out. It's the second element to the story of Durubban, which is that Hawkesbury River, the kind of resurfacing of the names, those Darug names. In my work with Hawkesbury Regional Gallery, I became super aware of all of the political kind of machinations of the Hawkesbury region. So there's the sort of the founding families who are very much about not telling any stories pre-colonial or even in that kind of very colonial frontier war sort of time period, just about how great they are that they fed the nation. Then there's the Darug people who have a much longer enduring story, which that from time to time they have had dislodged from that kind of long narrative. And so this was a way of getting Darug community to actually start telling those songlines, start telling those stories again. So I was working with the archaeological collection from the museum and I was telling the story of the frontier wars. At first, I had just pitched to just tell the first of those frontier massacres, but obviously I was too convincing. And so I ended up telling the entire story along the entire songline. So from Yarramundi all the way through to Sackville Ridge. If you've been to the State Library, you may have seen that exhibition because it ran quite a long time. It's an exhibition that has had lots of kind of stalls thanks to flooding, because it is an area that's flooded 4 times in the last 18 months. But what I tried to do was actually embody some of the knowledge that I had gained from the Darug women. So they said, yes, please tell our story, but be mindful of the fact that you are speaking with our objects. So when I went into the collection, I would open the boxes very gingerly and I would say, hello, it's Marina. I worked with you 18 months ago. I'm coming to tell your story if you'd like to work with me. And as simple as that seems to kind of be so kind of like just talk to a bunch of rocks, basically, you're actually enacting culture. You're enlivening those objects and you're bringing that spirit back to those little tiny, in some cases, objects. But by doing that, you're also letting those objects speak in a much louder voice as a collective than they ever could if there were just that one object in those beautiful little plastic bags. I was the only non-Indigenous person working on the exhibition to display something. And it was profoundly exciting to sort of notice that my work was next to not just the senior woman of the collective, but also right in front of Black Douglas's work. And I had worked with him over my career since 2010. So we had a lovely kind of conversation both in that space, but also over our careers, which I mean, I'm always telling people, go check him out. He's great. And he's finally got the acknowledgements. So.
Yeah. But I mean, it's interesting. We keep coming back to this idea of community because you're talking about a community that you've been deeply involved with over an extended period of time. And so often conversations in cultural institutions are about that sustained investment and that long-term commitment to telling those stories and to making sure those stories are richly told. What are the sort of experiences that have spoken to you in your engagement in that space? And I'm going totally off this. I'm really sorry, but I'm just really interested. Have you, I mean, in that gaming community, Chloe, I know because I follow you on Twitter. I know that you've got this deep connection with that community, and obviously that comes from your own experience.
Yeah. So for me, I'll give a little personal. But when I was a teenager, I got really, really unwell. Like I couldn't go to school, and I was actually quite cut off from the world. And I didn't really know what to do with my time because I wake up, I didn't watch TV, and I just needed something to stimulate my brain. And we had a PlayStation, so I'd start PlayStation 3. I'm not that old. And we I pulled the game up. So, and then I started making friends through these online communities. And then from there, I was like, oh no, I actually really like playing games, and kept on playing games for my entire life. And I never really thought it would be a career option. But no, this year it's been quite exciting to come to that space with my private knowledge and my passion for it too. And you can see when someone doesn't really have a passion for something, and particularly in museums, like, oh, it's put on, but like there's no love there.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm not saying that like
You're deeply committed, let's be honest.
I'm very committed to it. Yeah, it's a massive, it's very close to my heart. So I want to make sure that he's represented, particularly with stigma around games where it's, again, just seen as a child's toy, but it's actually really not.
Deeply misunderstood.
Deeply misunderstood. So am I.
There's still a stereotype about it being such a gendered activity as well.
Well, the recent the Digital Australia report has come out. So there is still predominantly more males, but females are that far off. So it's like almost half female, and then 3% non-binary. So it's
that's come a long way.
It's come a long way, particularly from, I think the last one, 2013, it was much less. And I would say that COVID would have helped bring that out as well. I mean, most females 30 are like the most on mobile gaming are the dominant force in games.
I wonder if as well there's sort of and this again, it's the same thing for all aspects of a cultural institution. There's a bit of a virtuous cycle there, I imagine, because the kinds of, once there's a critical mass, the kinds of stories that get told in games start to shift in response to the populations that are there. And so it's kind of like, actually, there is an audience that's hungering for stories that aren't just, say, for example, blowing up a bunch of aliens. Not there's anything wrong with blowing up a bunch of aliens,
Great fun.
But there's diversity there, isn't there? And then that speaks to, like, if there's a community that can access a museum or heritage space that wasn't recognized before. I know, obviously, you and I personally being the child of migrants, and that's something which, you live your life born thinking, I don't belong anywhere. I have a face that looks like this, but if I go back to where my parents were born, I just have to open my mouth and they're like, you foreigner, you don't belong here. And so it's kind of like, well, where do I exist in Australia being such a multicultural society? This is a place where actually things like migrant law have such an important role in telling those stories.
Yeah, and that all of our cultural institutions are working really hard to make sure that they do document this extraordinary wealth of history, the objects that migrants bring with them, their stories of migration, because these are really powerful stories of community And the power comes from representing the richness of our community, doesn't it? And finding yourself in that space.
But it also is redefining our sort of foundation narrative, because we still have people who are arriving today and they are just as kind of vital and important to our culture as those people in 1788.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's thank you for being a migrant, Dad.
No, I think that this is a really important aspect of how museums are changing and how they're seeking to diversify their collection, but everything from gaming to making sure that they're capturing the latest wave of migrants and the other forms of community expression and experience. Where I think we're going to move on to what's been important to your development as a professional. So Eddie, you're a professional educator. Chloe, you're also an educator, let's be honest, that's what a curator does deep down. It's just a different name. And Marina, you're in that space as well. I mean, what are the lessons that you think you have learned and you bring to your roles? I think that would be a really interesting kind of difference for all of us.
I might jump in there because this might be, actually, I started to piece this answer together in my head. I thought this is a bit of a weird off the track answer, but I wonder if actually it wouldn't be that dissimilar to what you, Marina, or you, Chloe, would say. For me, it's about capturing, understanding, appreciating, and capturing a multi-perspectival view of the world. And I think that's what's helped me to become a better educator. I didn't realize actually before I started teaching that sort of saying, okay, look, you're a high school teacher, you've got 150 students on average every year, and some of them will line up really naturally with your instincts. And I guess there's a parallel there to, okay, you're designing an exhibition or a space for all of your community, and some of them are going to naturally line up with your instincts and your lived experience, but a large proportion of them will not. And so gaining an understanding and appreciation for their experience and incorporating that into the way that you're talking about accessibility before, being able to say, no, I've crafted this in such a way, I've crafted my lesson, I've crafted this exhibition such that everyone can find their place here, perhaps engage in it in a different way, but engage with it in a substantial way and find where they belong within it.
Yeah. What do you others think? I come to everything that I do, and it's from gaming to the ceramics, every aspect. I come to it with a sense of empathy, understand that every story is important, even though I may not have a connection to it, it's important to somebody. Coming into an exhibition, designing it, like, okay, I have to consider lighting for people with low visibility, making sure that, say, if it is audio, there's captions or some other option available for people who are hard of hearing. Just really being empathetic to the audience and understanding where they're coming from, while also trying to convey the stories that are meaningful.
I think the thing I've learnt to sort of harness the most is actually, even though I'm the world's greatest talker, is to actually listen. To be still, be quiet, and really take in what, especially my community. I'm from the Blue Mountains. I've spent a lot of time working with the arts community up there. But even when I was working at my local gallery, my regional gallery, I noticed there were still artistic groups that weren't being represented. And so for me, no matter what space I'm in, no matter what position I have, I'm always trying to find ways to bring others along with me for the journey, so that it's not just me who's enriched, but my entire community. And I think that probably comes from being originally a high school art teacher, where it's like you're trying to get everyone to learn the skills so that they all then feel equipped to at least be able to draw a reasonable portrait. But beyond that, it was about them having the language to then speak about their visual world in a way that equipped them with the knowledge that they weren't stupid, they weren't disconnected, that they were actually capable of tapping into something that they didn't even realize they had inside them. And by being able to be quiet, be humble, and listen, and then kind of find ways to sort of sneak people in under your kind of paycheck. I don't care about the money. I care about helping everybody. And I think that's probably why I don't have very much money.
But a very rich sense of purpose. Yeah, no, really, really important ideas, I think, and really important to think about the way that cultural institutions can build those connections, not just with the people who come, but are increasingly having to think about people who don't come. So the people who your class doesn't speak to, Eddie, and then you think about another way to get through. That's exactly the kind of innovation that I think museums are doing so well at the moment, to open up and get the non-attendees to come and kind of see this space as valuable, and see their heritage and see their own history. I think that's incredibly important. I want us to kind of wrap around maybe with some ideas about what are you excited for the future of cultural institutions, and where, like, there's so much potential. If we think about where education's going, where we think about all these things, what excites you?
Quite a bit. Particularly, I'm sure you would have seen the recent International Council of Museums definition that came out in August, and the whole focus was about community outreach, sustainability, accessibility. It was really focusing on the public rather than the stuffy institution. That's what I'm excited about, is the engagement.
Can I cheat and give two?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not calling
it's one that actually we've done a stunningly good job so far throughout tonight of avoiding discussing, but I am going to have to talk about COVID, because I feel like these last 3 years have obviously changed a lot of our lives, but particularly, and this is something that I'm very conscious of within a school environment, but we've all experienced it. When our lives have been limited and changed and altered, I think it's given us all a real sense of appreciation for things that, well, you don't know how good something is until it's taken away from you. And even though we've all gotten so much better about doing things online and sort of being able to access things that we couldn't do before, and thankfully have learned some lessons that we now carry into our new business as usual. At the same time, I think certainly has taught all of us that there are certain irreplaceable things that come from entering into a space that's been designed. We're embodied. I mean, we haven't found a way to disentangle ourselves from the shackles of physical existence yet.
No, Chloe, you'll be on it.
So I'm sure we'll find a way. But until then, we are human beings who exist in bodies in a physical space, and there's a really visceral, special experience about it. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is just about the hope of connection. Actually, this is what you reminded me of, Marina, when you were talking about different communities. I feel as though what education's superpower is that, I always wondered, like, why are uniforms so important in a school context? It's about saying, hey, here we are all on equal footing, and you are very different. You're such a diverse group, but there are so many things that you share in common as fellow human beings, and we need to lean into those and learn those afresh. Every generation needs to learn that afresh. And we're living in a world that's so polarized now. I'm not even going to get started on it. I feel like it's self-evidently true. And inviting each other into a common space to say, like you said before, Chloe, this might not be important to me yet, but it's important to someone. And developing an appreciation for that, I think, does a lot to sort of erode that polarization that's just taken hold of our world at the moment.
I think the thing that excites me the most about museums and heritage art galleries, all of that, is the idea that we are so much closer to things. So I can be thinking of an object and then Google it, and there it is. And like, I'll never forget, I think it was like 2010, maybe 2009, when Google Art Project first started, and you could zoom right in on a Van Gogh, or you could, like, actually be this close to the Sistine Chapel, like things like that, which you physically aren't allowed to in museums and galleries. And unless you're my dad. I could see his hand in the background. But But just this idea that you don't actually have to get on a carbon producing tin sardine can and go and traipse around places that you don't speak the language. You can see them and connect with them. Yes, it's not the godly object, but it has a kind of resonance. And it also gives you the ability to go, I'm seeing this in an intimate way that, you know, no one else is going to experience in the real space. Like imagine, unless you're Beyonce and Jay-Z, you're not going to get to have the Louvre to yourself. So to be able to, yeah, I mean, even just as simple as like, I don't really want to have to drive to Bendigo to see their collection, but I know they have amazing things.
Yeah.
So
Right. I think that's really,
digitization of collection.
the digitization is really exciting, and I think the way that that's changed things is that almost everything is local now. That you don't have to travel. Lots of people, it's not a possibility, and it opens up these fabulous things, and it means that they're familiar in ways that they wouldn't have been previously.
And in a way, it means that you can navigate Venice.
Yes,
Like just
Yeah.
with that same thing. I had worked on the Biennale, and so I was like, oh, we're lost.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, we're not.
Yeah.
Like if I could get the eagle eye view, I'd be okay.
I need to climb up on this ledge actually. But
For those who don't know the game, check it out.
Thank you so much. I think that's been such an interesting discussion, and I've really loved our focus on community and empathy and thinking about from different perspectives, because I think that is at the core of what cultural institutions are aiming to do and how they're transforming.
That's what we do as
And
educators here as well.
And it is the model, as Eddie would know as well, it's the model of how we try. Like the fact that Chloe could come to us with an ancient history major, but a passion for games, and it would lead somewhere, I think is really exciting. And the same for Marina, that, you know, you've brought your passion, you're committed to it, and you've done wonderful things. So I would like to thank the panel, and I'd like to ask people to clap. We've done a beautiful job. But we do have time for questions. And we do have a roving mic as well, because we'll have to, of course, relay questions to people on Zoom. While people are gathering their thoughts for questions, can I maybe not?
the mouse is on Zoom at the moment, that's why.
The mouse is on Zoom. Do you
So-
just want to take us through some of those slides, or? I'm not sure. There are so many devices around. This is the delights of teaching. So I did think it was useful for people, while you're thinking of your questions, to have a sense of the Museum and Heritage Studies program, because one of the great things about this program is it's a nested program. So that if you're not sure, you can do a taster, you can do the graduate certificate, and that you can upgrade over time. And that is a great experience, and that the 3 degrees have different kind of emphasis. And the master's program, in the kind of value of that master's program, it's a 1.5-year long program for most students, but the core value, I think, of that, and I think that, you know, that my panelists could speak to, if I let them, was that of course means that you can do an internship as part of your degree. You've got that option for the graduate diploma, but a lot of our students doing the MA actually do 2, or they do a research dissertation. And one of that I think is a huge asset. Chloe, where did you, I should have checked, you did 2 internships. Where did you do them?
One was I actually went to New Zealand, so I got to study at the Museum of Transport Technology, and then the other one was a powerhouse.
So I think our internships are a real asset in our program, as is in the master's program, if you'd like. The other advantage in the masters is that if you're really keen on pursuing your particular topic, I'm not looking at anyone, but if you're really keen on pursuing a particular topic, that you can use that as a way to do a research project. And I've had fabulous students who've done research projects that relate not just to individual passions, but actually align with organisations they're working with, where they're advancing research as part of their degree. So really interesting. Should I kick off the questions, or do we have questions online or questions in the room? Thank you.
Wanting to be the first one. Yeah, thank you, panelists, for a very lively discussion. And on the ground of the Gadigal people, as well as the University of Sydney. And right at our doorstep is the Zhou Wing Museum. How lucky are we to have a museum on university ground? So this is a plug and not a plug, of course. What is the museum, or what are the things that this particular museum are doing very well, in your opinion? And what can the museum do more?
Okay, I got this. I got this. Okay, so having worked as a public programmer, educator in the museum space, one of the things that they do so well is they have a teaching collection, and they really push this idea of learning from real objects. So you can't understand, and I have only a very limited knowledge of archaeology, and I would say that my archaeological sort of spin is very much Durham community based only. But the fact that you can, learn about, a piece of Grecian pottery and physically hold it, that to me is absolutely mind-blowingly, you can't get that in the classroom. And that's,
Although you do in ours.
well, but you can't, obviously I've got my digital Grecian pot, but it's not the same as actually physically holding that thing and knowing that, for thousands of years, this has been in the soil. And then before that, it was clay being manipulated and fired. And do you know what I mean? Like and the fact that Craig Barker has such a hands-on approach to teaching, I think that's really key, because he's an archaeologist by kind of practice, but he is very much an impassioned educator. And what they do is they use every single item in that collection to really kind of what's your passion? What's your passion? What's your passion? Okay, let's explore. And I think you don't get that outside of a teaching collection.
I think as a university museum, this is a really important function, is that link to education. A lot of those collections have come out of the teaching program or the work that, archaeologists who are employed in the department doing the digs, it's informed through that.
And I can say they take a lot of our interns as the internship officer, put my hat on. They take a lot of interns and they turn them into really competent members of that community, the museum community. And I think that's really key, because they are so generous with their knowledge that there is that understanding that you might be studying this, but you might also next week become my new boss, because we are a cohort of, fluid careers.
And I think the other asset that's on campus that's really good to know about is, of course, the Verge Gallery, which is the SCU. They do some fabulous work. And we also have the new gallery space in the SCA. And there's also an amazing art collection that's attached to the university. So that there is this richness of the cultural life on campus. And there's a lot of work happening around indigenising the spaces as well. So even at the botanical level, I think we can look at the campus as this extraordinary site of place and space and heritage that's really rich and rewarding.
Can I add something, Chiara? Actually, just going back to Shawshank for when I went there 6 weeks ago, actually, and was just enjoying the space, slightly unusually without my children, because I usually bring my children to all these kinds of things, but I was here there was a graduation ceremony that I spoke at. And what I loved was that this actually speaks a little bit to, modeling Venice in 3D geometry. The Lego display right at the bottom, you could see the children all kind of just gravitate toward it. And it's a way, it speaks to them in a way that's kind of almost natural to their language, and kind of says, hey, pay attention, you belong in this space too. And this is a world that you want to explore as well. And then it becomes a gateway to saying, but what is also that? And what is this? And it's delightful that it so clearly is designed as something which invites them in to participate as well.
What do they need? What more? Maybe we'll come back to that. Let's, all museums can do more though. Is there online?
So it's a two-part question. What is the difference between graduate certificate, the graduate diploma, and the master's degree?
Yeah.
And if I've completed a master of teaching, can I jump straight into a master of museums and heritage degree, or do I need to complete a graduate certificate or a graduate diploma?
Okay. So that's a question for me. So the way they nest in together is that the graduate certificate is 4 units. So it's a semester-long period of study. It's a taster, basically, is the way I think about it. The graduate diploma is a year-long period of study with the option of an internship as an extra thing. The master's is a 1.5 year long program, so 12 units of study. And that across those units, you're developing core skills, theory, practice, and insights and skills, okay? In terms of the specific question about if you've already got an MA, what you'd get is you'd get advanced standing for some of those units, so that there'd be units in our program, particularly if you're coming from an education background, where you'd get advanced standing for those units. But it would still be worth you doing a goodly number so that you have those skills that allow you to transition into that new area. And Marina can probably speak.
I would say, as someone who had a Master of Art Administration, I could have ticked off so many of those, but I decided that I actually wanted to understand the entire program it's almost like reading a book without getting the first and the last chapter if you kind of tick things off. So I wanted to know the entire narrative.
I think I can say that a lot of students say that to me once they've got their advanced standing, and then they're frustrated that they didn't get to do more of the subjects. But yeah, by all means, email me and I can take the person through.
And you'd be great at engaging audiences.
You'd kill that one. But yeah, no, great question. Is there another question in the room?
Great questions and also fantastic ideas. I'm interested in heritage sites and how I actually did Turkey with a 17-year-old and Assassin's Creed. Right? So they don't do that. We don't have that here. And what I see in heritage sites are 2 audiences. The primary schools who come with a teacher and might dress up and, engage using food and things like that. And then people more my age, over 60s, suddenly decide, oh, what's my family heritage? There's a huge gap. And we're talking today about, education. Rarely a high school student in a heritage site. What ideas, what can heritage sites do to become more relevant? Sorry to be.
Did you plant this question, Marina?
I feel like you've been in some of my lectures. So one of the things that has been fascinating me about heritage interpretation, because that's really what we're talking about, is this idea of like recreation, sort of like cities, or recreation costume battles, or even just as simple as like a marketplace. So like so again, driving into the city here today, we come through Parramatta. Parramatta has so many stories it could tell. You could tell the story of, those warriors versus the redcoats in a sort of battle recreation. It could be something where we're reinterpreting the way that site is then understood, because it's not just First Government House, is it? It's a battle site. So, I mean, in places like Finland and Denmark, Norway, they do the kind of amazing whole city that is the Norse warriors, sort of the Viking stuff. And you can go and do the trebuchet and all of that stuff, which is amazing. But here in Australia, how would we do that? I think you actually have to really work with the communities to tell those stories, because you could go to the goldfields and tell, the Chinese narrative of gold panning versus the Irish, Scottish narrative. You could tell the Indigenous story of that. But in doing so, you have to be connected to those communities who want to tell those stories. You could even just do it in a simple, I had a guy from soccer. He likes to do the, what is it? The gold, the gold detecting, right?
No.
But he goes out to the gold fields, but he doesn't look for gold. He's actually, like belt buckles and all of those sorts of things. That's interpretation of sight. So I don't think we have to sort of do the, old Sydney town anymore.
I mean, I think teenagers are a very difficult audience across museums and cultural heritage. They're
Too
missing.
cool.
Yeah, they don't want to do it. It's what they did with their parents when they were kids. They want to do their own stuff. They're at Luna Park. That's where I saw them in large numbers and just went, this is where you are. And I think that cultural organisations are getting smarter at talking to that group. And your example of the TikTok, I think is a phenomenal one, so that it's actually about institutions learning to speak that language and engaging those groups on their terms, rather than saying you need to come in and learn about Elizabeth MacArthur, because that's not going to speak to them. So I think there's a lot of really inventive programming that is happening.
Having said that though, they do an amazing eel festival out
And
at
Parramatta.
at Paramount, and they do it from both perspectives. So it's like, eel pie versus, like eel wrapped and kind of smoked, which I don't eat eel, but it sounds amazing.
Can I add in one more? Just, and it comes back to this TikTok idea. I mean, teenagers are some people say to me, like, you must be like, I don't know, there's something wrong with you, clearly, something pathological that you would choose to be, but I actually think, just quietly, and I have the authority to say this as now a parent of one as well. I think teenagers get a bad rap. I think what I love is that adolescence is a time to ask big, enormous questions, particularly around, and maybe this is part of why, speaking to you mentioned, this is something my parents did, and I need to find my own sense of identity and belonging. It's part of where classic adolescent risk-taking behavior comes from. It's like, I need to work out who I am separate to your identity that's been imposed on me. And so that's just a natural behavior. And so I actually think part of why, it's trended on TikTok is because it's like, no, this is my participation in this space. I'm in the driver's seat, and I can describe what resonates with me and why. And that is very clever, but it has to bring them in as the participants, I think, and put them in the driver's seat, which is, it's terrifying, but helpful.
They've done a phenomenal job at that, at bringing in a group of young people up to certain limits, the MCA as well, where they have young people actually curating the nights. And that's, I mean, I think there is a lot of great inventive work happening in some institutions, and it just takes a long time to filter down across everywhere. And I think that we see that in the way that all sites work.
Hyde Park did a great job of incorporating Jonathan Jones's huge work on that.
They're doing some wonderful stuff about the site installation.
So
ex-graduate of ours, Kim Tao, running the program there too.
So I think
Starting.
it's just sort of expanding, so that, like, I mean, even just in my local, it's like haunted house is the first step, because it's like the spooky old place. It's the oldest place in the mountains that's colonial building. So, telling stories again, but just using a kind of different context. So it's always Halloween. Now, see.
You think I'm not in the revenge business? I don't get you back.
For everyone at home, this is my father.
Pick her in our camping. All she gets out of it on the way to Molong is, look at the blaze tree, look at the blaze coming back. Oh, look, that's the grave site of the gentleman that took Oxley, the explorer, up north and back, because I can remember her and her grandfather admiring Oxley's Falls out of Manila and wondering how the hell he could find it in where it was. Well, obviously, the Indigenous gentleman that took him there. But that's observation. Now we're going to try and figure out how do we put together and get other people to understand it and be excited by it. Now, Chloe, you're digital. This is great.
No, I love your name.
The new generation, not a old dinosaur.
I think I feel like digital though, it encapsulates a whole, like every generation, if I'm going to be honest. So I feel like I can get you. Yeah. Great on the apps.
You figure out the algorithm that'll get us there.
I'll work on it.
A long time ago, in the days of reading, writing, I used to be pretty good at both subjects. But when we went over the calculus, I got first level passes in economics, geography, and accounting. Second level passes in English and science. I could only get a second level pass in science because I couldn't do the maths. I got a third level pass because we had a teacher who assumed I could use not a calculator, but a slide rule. And he never, ever once tested why I couldn't do the work. Plus, he always spoke to the blackboard. He never engaged me. Now, because of the pandemic, and I've had a half job done, and I've been confined to the house, I've been watching Alone Denmark, Alone Sweden, all these survivors. What I've picked out is you can have 30 people in the room, given the same problem, there are 30 different solutions. 2 might work, 3 or 4 are passable, the rest are absolute flops. The task of the educator is to actually make the eye contact to see if what they're saying is actually lighting a light in their eye. I once did a small skit when I was in high school teaching the younger kids physics. And I could see just by looking at them, they weren't understanding, and I'd had to go back, and for that particular student or that one, I had to rewrite the narrative. And for others, they were in front of me. How can you do that if you're doing it digitally?
Whoa, that's a big question.
My God, that was a very long way to get.
That's a big question.
Wow, I wasn't expecting that. Look, I think I think we've got a long way to go in terms of digital. I do agree with that. The technology is here, but it's also about finding unique ways for each member of the community. When I say members, I mean like different aspects and different generations of how they can use it. Because like there are some people who prefer to come to museums and heritage sites and read labels. Some people prefer audio and visual cues. So I guess it's just, yeah, look, I don't have an answer for that.
No, but don't you think, Chloe, that, because I think there's something really interesting in that idea, but I think digital in some respects can do it endlessly in a way that you can't in a physical space.
Yeah.
You just keep trying, and if it doesn't work, you try another
You
method.
keep trying. Yeah.
And whereas in a physical exhibition space, if you do an exhibition and it doesn't work, you've spent a lot of time.
And it's
quite heavy.
Yeah.
And that you go down into that space and you suddenly realize, well, no one knows how to drive the interactive because they're not clear on the, the instructions. How do we make that clearer? You change a panel, you make those adjustments. Yeah. So I suppose education is always about adjusting and looking for that light. But it doesn't necessarily come the first go.
I don't know. I mean, for me, sorry to jump in. I mean, I may be misreading the question, but my experience of I played a lot of games when I was younger, when I was closer to Chloe's age, and I remember for me, what was so attractive about a digital experience was, especially these open worlds that you could just go anywhere, and it's kind of like, well, I mean, the designer, thought that this is what I would do, but I found another way, and that's kind of what's brilliant about it. It's not linear, and anyone can kind of take the path that they want through it. Not everything is crafted like that, but it can be sort of designed to take on everyone who wants to play it in their own different way. And then, the person who wants to play it a second or a third or a fourth time in a different way and experience it in another light. I feel like digital is the perfect avenue to do that, actually.
Yeah, and I'm pretty excited about the possibilities too. And like, I will use again as an example of what I know. There's a space. It's the title escapes me. It's the acronym OOO, but it's you go in and you make your own gallery, and it's fully online interactive, and it's just these ways of bringing people together. And then use it. They can use, I mean, it's not but you can use images from galleries and like famous portraits and different types of furniture and architectural pieces, and you can go in there. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I have thought about it. I was like, in the exhibition.
In here, in here.
Yeah. And it's also another thing that we've been exploring too, like how digitally can we make an exhibition? So look, I think the possibilities are endless and they're quite exciting. And I do like the idea of this open world aspect, and a lot of digital spaces are becoming this open world, like with metaverse. But you know, it's like we got the it's exciting. Yeah. Marina, I don't know if you-
I think the only thing I would say in relation to my dad's question is that what you actually keyed in on was that there are totally different learners within any given space. And regardless of how you reach them, it's actually your job either as the educator, as the, person on the radio, as the, curator, to actually find kind of nuances within the way that you actually speak your truth, so that when you are having someone come in who is, they like to touch things, you've got that element covered, but then you've also got that text-based person, maybe the audio person, maybe you've got a sit for the person who just likes to sit and immerse themselves, but that you've actually catered to all of those different learning styles, that you haven't just gone, I only listen to books online, so I'm only going to do everything as an audio guide. Like, that doesn't work. I think it's about actually acknowledging the variety of learning styles or the diversity of our audiences.
And the possibilities.
Absolutely.
So then we'll leave on possibilities.
So,
Thank you so much. Thank you to the audience for our questions. We have, there's a table where I think I can get Marina to come and sit with me, and we can, if people want to come and talk to us. There is a couple more slides that will just flash up, because there is, particularly for people online, but also for people in the room, we've got a new initiative which was launched earlier this year, which is a scholarship was aimed at Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander students coming into our program, and that's something that we're very keen to support and develop. It's a really important area for museums. And then if you can go on to, there is a survey. There's always surveys when you come to the university. We've always got a survey for you. So there's one for that here.
If you've been to any heritage site,
There's a survey. And then on the last slide, which we can put up later, or there's just my contact details, so that if anyone has any questions, email me. It's the best way to get in contact with me, and I can send out lots of links and give you lots of information about our programs. But thank you. I was not expecting to have so much fun on a Wednesday night. It's such a great group of people. Lovely to see my students, my colleagues, and to spend time with Lou. And really think about these questions around education and what museums are doing. I think it is really exciting. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.